Okay, so in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to combine our sunny day sky with a tree line and a foreground of like a field of grass and brush. Put them all together and have a nice little landscape with the sky. All right, so I'm going to start with, by the way, guys, when you take your brushes, before you start, you might want to just kind of rinse them off again and wipe them off on something white like paper towel or a white terry cloth towel, just to make sure there's no residue from your previous painting on them, because they will tint your painting, and sometimes when you start that, it's hard to get rid of it. So it's always a good idea to wash your brushes first. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do the wet into wet for this sky. So I'm just going to take clean water, and again, I'm just going to brush across my paper, always brushing side to side, trying to make sure that we get, not only cover the whole thing, but we get that excess water off. We don't want pooling on there. So I'm going to go approximately like 3/4 of the way down the page here on this one. I'm using my smaller pad here. So I'm generous with the water. I want it to soak in. Again, the wet into wet process allows us to create really soft blended areas, and it really kind of just helps us to make those effects happen. So, and you can go a little further if you want to, because it's really not going to affect anything. It'll probably be dry by the time we get there. So I'm just going to go ahead and, again, you can see I'm kind of looking very closely at the paper and looking for that sheen of the paper, because I want to make sure that I don't have pooling and I definitely covered everything, because if I don't cover it, I'll make a mark as well. All right, so for that I used my 3/4 inch flat brush. So now I'm going to take my number 10 brush and I'm going to use phthalo blue. Again, remember, phthalo blue is that typical sunny sky blue. And I want to make sure that I have enough of this that I can do that whole kind of field of blue in one shot without having to stop and remix. So I'm going to make sure that I have enough. One other little tip, guys, when you're mixing, be careful that you don't flick paint onto your painting. I do it all the time, but it's something to be mindful of, because it is kind of annoying when you have a real nice painting and all of a sudden you flicked some dark blue on a spot, especially that you wanted it to be white. So just be mindful of how you're mixing, because you definitely don't want to do that. All right, so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to mix up my phthalo blue. I'm trying to get approximately the same value as what I see in my reference material. I might follow my reference a little closer in this one. I'm not going to go crazy, but I will try to get a little bit closer, just as far as cloud structure goes. I'm not going to go nuts as far as matching perfect colors and everything. But all right, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a really nice fluid mix and have enough of it that I can make it through that field fairly seamlessly, all right, without stopping to remix. And I'm always going to test it out on my test paper. It's always a good idea to have a little piece of scrap paper laying around, and just to test your colors out. Now this may look really dark to you, but it will dry lighter. So I'm adding a little bit more water. I want it to be a little more fluid. Yeah, that's the consistency I'm looking for. All right. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this cloud pattern, and I'm going to then, I'm kind of figuring my tree line, my horizon line will be here, my trees will kind of bounce around somewhere around here. So I'm going to let my clouds start around here. And what we spoke about last time, it's nice to have both hard and soft edges when you're using these kind of clouds. Now this looks really dark, but it will dry lighter. So I'm just kind of, freehanding this and getting an approximate shape of my clouds. All right. Probably use my number 6 brush now. And I'm going to play with those edges a little. So I'm going to kind of leave this area over here kind of crisp. Then as I get over here, I'm going to soften a little. So what I'm going to do is just going to take some water, and I'm going to manage the edges of this particular cloud shape. So I have to be careful I don't have too much water on, because that'll pull the pigment back in and bleed it and make it go where I don't want to go. So I'm just going to soften this edge with a moist brush. I don't have to do all that much work to it, because that beautiful wet paper that's just helping us to blend so nicely. So all we have to do is kind of just tickle the edges of this cloud and with a moist brush, and we get that really nice soft edge that we're looking for. I'm going to soften a couple more spots and keep this area up here nice and soft as well. It's amazing how fast, you see how much water I put on there, and already that paper is drying. So I definitely want to have some kind of variation in that field of blue. I don't want it to be so hard and solid that it doesn't look natural. Now I'm going to take my paper towel, a little piece of paper towel that I rolled up, and I'm going to roll through where I have those kind of tendrils of clouds in the field of blue. You have to make sure that you're doing this while it's still wet, and it'll still come off. It's just kind of another little technique we can use to pull pigment out and create some lighter areas. And I started that again with the paper towel. It just kind of took the bulk of it off for me. And I also kind of like how this is getting lighter towards the top. Helps kind of lead your eye over this way a little bit, which is nice. You also got to be careful not to overwork the paper. If you put too much scrubbing action on there with your brush and you do it over and over, you're going to fray the paper, and that's not something we want to happen. So, just be mindful of that. You don't want to beat the paper up too much, all right? And this is 140-pound paper, so it can take a little bit of a beating, but not too much, all right? So you see I'm just kind of taking my brush and scrubbing the edge of that little spot there. All right, so now what I can do is I can start looking at the pattern of the interior of the clouds. And what we did last time, we kind of switched to ultramarine blue. So ultramarine blue, again, is more of a violet blue. So you can see the difference. It's quite a different color. But in these clouds, you'll see that there always is some kind of violet, even on a sunny day. But we have the opportunity as artists to change things however we want. Phthalo blue or cerulean blue or even cobalt blue will be more of a happy sunny day sky. You can use those, but if you wanted to, kind of make it look a little more realistic, you can throw that ultramarine in there and violet. And I just got a little flick of paint on there, just like I was talking about before. So I'm just going to take some clean water while I caught it and just kind of mush it out so I don't have any hard marks there. Remember, we want to try to always control our watercolor by going from light to dark. With a transparent medium, that's usually the case. All right, so I'm going to start again, like over here. I'm going to create this strong shadow pattern within the cloud, which is right here. Again, you can see the difference in the type of blue this is. This is ultramarine blue, and this is phthalo blue. It's quite a different color. But it's always nice to have a variation of colors in there. And some of the really good watercolor artists, you'll see that they're incredibly free with their color. They're able to blend all sorts of nice colors together. It's really cool. All right, so I kind of laid that overall pattern in, and then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of blend it out with clean water. So I'm coming from this edge here, and I'm paying attention to the structure of that shadow shape. So I want to stay somewhere in the ballpark. I don't want to lose that shape, because if I lose the shape of the shadow, I'll also lose kind of that likeness to this reference material that I'm using to base this on. So I got to be mindful too, because I don't want to let my edges dry on me here. So I'm working relatively quickly, but I also have to remember what I put down already and try to make sure that where there's a soft edge, I still do it in time, where give myself enough time to come back and feather it out where I want it to be soft. All right. There are some spots where I'm going to leave it a little more crisp, but where it's really soft and feathered out, I want to make sure that I get there quick enough so that I don't have to fight a hard edge that I don't want. Like over here, I'm going to kind of pull some of these little tendrils out again as the dark bits kind of overlap into the lighter area now. And kind of that same thing that was going on up here is happening right here. And so what I'm doing is I'm looking at the overall shadow shapes that this reference material is showing me. You can see it does have a completely different feel to it when you have darker clouds, and those violets, they make it seem somehow a little less happy. I don't know. It just might be something I feel, but I mean the violets kind of show almost like a rainy feel to it. So you see what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take certain areas and lay them in and then kind of manage those areas. I don't want to let these things get away from me where I can't go back and soften edges where I need to. So I'm being careful to not bite off more than I can chew, so to speak. So now I'm going to throw some of my phthalo blue back into these areas where that field of blue, that's the background sky, is showing through. I have some of that going on over here and here. So again, this is just phthalo blue and a little bit of white. So down at the very bottom, what I can do is I can just kind of let this blend out because my trees are going to go right over it. As long as I keep it really light and just kind of let it blend out and I don't have any kind of really definitive hard edge there, I should be okay. Again, there's little spots where my background clouds or something, background sky is showing through. So now we're going to lay in the tree line. And I put out some colors here. I put out some Viridian green, some light green, and some sap green. And I'm kind of playing with the light green and the Viridian green mixed with a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of lemon yellow. So this is kind of what I came up with. This right here, this is a little bit more yellow ochre than I wanted. So I'm going to just kind of lay in a light layer of this mixture of Viridian green, yellow ochre, and lemon yellow. Yep, something like that. So I'm going to lay this, I'm looking at my horizon line, which is right about here. And I'm going to put my trees right over the top of this sky that's blended back down into the foreground, all right? So let's just say, for instance, that one tree is kind of popping up around here. So this is a case where we're going to do something a little bit different technique-wise. We're just going to kind of just do little, like when you draw a tree, just draw a vertical line where that tree is going to be. Remember, our horizon line is approximately here. So now we want to make sure that we don't make the trees look too clunky and too, too predictable. You don't want it looking like a kid drew a Christmas tree with all the exact same lines. It can't be too predictable. So we're just going to kind of plop in these little, almost like with a stabbing technique here. We're just going to put this first light layer down where our trees live, and we're going to come back over this with some darker values. All right. Remember, that's Viridian green, a little bit of yellow ochre, and some lemon yellow. I'm keeping it light and kind of a nice colorful green because I can always go back over this and add the darks, and it's going to be a combination of those two, the darks and the lights. All right, so I'm trying to create some kind of believable tree shape here. All right, I don't want to make like little lollipops or fake looking trees. So I'm going to try to just kind of keep this. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to manage it in little chunks. So I'm going to take this area here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of wash this bottom part out with some clean water so it just kind of fades. All right, I don't want a crisp line there. Right, leave that for a second, and then I'm going to continue my tree line over on the other side. Same colors. I'm just going to dip in there and continue on. Like, remember, my horizon line is right about here. I have a little break in the trees, and I have some more. These are almost like more like kind of like bushes. So kind of giving the general sense of what's going on there as far as the shapes and what it looks like. Again, I'm just going to wash my brush off and again blend that bottom line out. I want that to be kind of soft because we have this beautiful kind of amber grass. Going to come right into that. So we'll kind of let that dry, and then we're going to mix up this foreground grass, which is probably going to be a combination of, I'm going to say, yellow ochre and maybe a little bit of burnt sienna and probably a touch of burnt umber. And we could punch up that color a little bit if we want to. That's not bad for the shadowy parts, but let's look at it for, I'm going to grab a little bit of white and mix up that lighter version of that color because that's what I'm going to start with. All right, so this is really kind of almost just that same mixture, just mixed into white and a little bit more yellow ochre in there now for the lighter part, and that's perfect. It's just what I want. So now I'm going to run this across horizontally across this whole spot here. I'm going to let it run right into those trees. And just going to let it wash right over where I think these things are going to go. And we have some foreground boulders and stones there. I think I'll throw them in there too. For the heck of it, some interest. You see, I'm kind of like forcing my brush upwards almost to give the appearance of that grass covering the trees. Now that probably could be a little lighter in value there, so I could take my brush and just kind of pull some pigment out. Yeah, that's one of the ways we can always lighten an area while it's still wet. Just take a moist brush and literally run your brush over, and you're wiping the pigment off literally from the page. It works really well. I'm going to add some of those darks. I'm not sure if I want to go quite this colorful, but let's see. Let's try it out. So what I'm just trying, I added a little burnt umber into this mix, and I think I'll throw that in there too. So I'm looking right here, and there's a little bit of a darker area going through that brush as well. So these are little clumps of grass that grow together, and this highlights and the shadow patterns is just like everything else. So we're just going to throw a little bit of shadowing in the grass. And now I'm just going to soften it a little bit. So now again, remember, we're going to be working from light to dark. So if we throw those boulders in there, we want to start with that nice light gray. And maybe even leave a couple spots of white in there poking through. So I'm just going to take my Payne's gray. See what that looks like. by itself. It's probably going to need a little bit of brown in it. I'm just really kind of letting this thing be a general wash. I'm looking at these kind of horizontal lines that are in the rock formation, and I can use them to create a little bit of texture here. All right, so I'm going to hit this with a hairdryer real quick. All right, so now I'm going to add some of my darker values into my trees. So if I'm looking at those darker values, I'm going to, my darkest green is the Viridian green. But if you use it straight out of the tube, it's just too chromatic. It's too much color. So we want to knock it down with a little bit of burnt umber and maybe even a little bit of Payne's gray. We'll just try those colors out and see how they look over our previous tryout colors and see how they look. Actually, that's not bad. I could probably throw a little bit more Payne's gray in there. Payne's gray is almost black, so you never want to use pure black or in trees. I mean, there's always, it's an excuse to throw color in into the shadows. You don't have to make them so colorless. You can always add little pops of color in. Generally, shadows have less color than areas in the light, but when we get into the world of painting, we try to balance that dynamic by throwing some color in. We call it broken color in little bits and pieces. I'm throwing a little bit of blue into this as well, just so it's not so pure, such a pure dark with gray and brown. All right, so now in this mix, I'm going to go a little drier than we did previously. I'm going to control it just a little bit more. So let's take this kind of some kind of pine tree here, and we're just going to kind of, I'm not going to toil over it too much, but I'm looking at my reference material, and I'm just doing like little dabs to try to mimic what's going on in that particular tree there. I'm trying to follow an overall shadow pattern and trying to match values as well. Now I'm going to lighten it up just a little bit as I come down to this. Probably throw a little bit of my light green in there, checking out my color, and I'm going to kind of look at what's going on here color-wise in my reference material. All right. I mean, sometimes when you do this, you can pre-moisten the paper if you want it to be really soft and have like a really fuzzy edge to the trees as they blend into the sky. That works as well. This is almost more of a drier approach, not quite dry brush, but it's definitely not as wet as I was using my mixture before. So again, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to create a sense of light and shadow here in the trees. I'm going back into my mixture of darks with the greens and the burnt umber and phthalo blue. Now this is the kind of thing too where you want, if you wanted to, it's really pretty easy to come back over this and do more to it when you need to. Now again, what I want to do here is I want to make sure that my edge between my trees and my grass stays really soft. That's because that grass is kind of overlapping your trees and you don't really see anything definitive. It's a very soft edge. So we want to keep that soft, and what I did is I just added water and kind of blended it in a little bit there. Kind of softening this up a little bit. Now one of the cool things about coming back in after the fact is you can always, like say for instance I feel I went a little too dark here, I can take my lighter values and just kind of, you know, poke them in a little bit with the stabbing effect and kind of lighten up that area as well. You see now I'm starting to get like a nice separation between my sky and my tree line, which is nice. So I'm going to come back in over here and do the same thing on this side. I'm using my darker mixture of the Viridian green and burnt umber, and also has a little bit of Payne's gray in it. And I'm just kind of looking at that tree or bush, trying to mimic that shadow pattern, what's going on there. I'm trying to leave some of that previous color, that original color there, to give areas of light as well within the bushes. Just got to soften that little edge. And then I'm going to come back in again with my darker green. So now I'm going to add some of those darker darks within the boulder area. Now I can really get a good strong dark in there, and I threw some ultramarine blue into my Payne's gray. Again, I just want it to be too dead in the shadow, so I got this really strong shadow pattern right here. I'm just going to kind of draw this in. Now, if you wanted to, again, ahead of time, you could draw this out, but this kind of stuff is so organic, you don't have to toil over it. It doesn't have to be perfect. and you can get somewhere in the realm and still have it look fairly convincing as far as being boulders and stones. And so again, this mixture is Payne's Gray, some burnt umber, and some ultramarine blue. I definitely have a really strong foreground shadow that I can put in. So remember, shadows are always darker when they're closer to you in the foreground. So if you wanted to create that illusion of depth, you could even you could push that whole dynamic by having your foreground shadows even darker. And as things get further away, they get lighter in value. It's one of the little tricks people use to create, even, really push the illusion of depth and distance. So now I can take a little bit of this, and I see some of these like little cracks and little bits of detail. So I could start putting some of them in as well. I'm going to just add a little bit more dark there. Like for instance, like right here, I got a little bit of a crack in the rocks. I got something going on here. I have something going on like right about here. It's kind of broken up. I don't want to make it a one perfect straight line either. And then what I can do afterwards, I can come back over and wash over this with some more color. Hit this with a hairdryer really quick. I also see a little bit of green kind of poking through those stones. I'll lay some of that in there. It's kind of yellow ochre and some light green mixed together. Do have some more of that going on over here as well. I could throw some of that green in there. All right, so now I'm going to take some of those darker grays and start bringing them in as well. It's like over here I have a little bit of a darker gray. So I'm using Payne's Gray and a little bit of burnt umber as a mix. And again, this is nothing too specific. We're just kind of indicating, suggesting some foreground boulders, and you don't really have to do all that much to them. Now you can see these have like kind of like these striations in them, and you want to kind of get that to show up, so you make sure your brush strokes are following that pattern. So I'm mixing up a little bit more. I kind of ran out, so it's kind of a blend of Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber. So what I want to be careful of now is I don't want to darken areas, and darker than they actually are. So I'm just really kind of going a little cautiously here and making sure that now my gray mixture is a little even lighter in value, because in here we have a bit of a lighter wash of this kind of gray brown, and so I'm just being mindful to keep it on the light side there where the values are a bit lighter. So I had a good soupy mixture there, nice and wet. We also have a little bit of that gray, a little bit of a bolder area back here. It wouldn't be bad to throw that color in there for a little bit of a color change and another shape. Maybe just throw a little bit of an accent shadow underneath it. I should wait till that dries a bit. Now I'll show you what I was talking about with the trees, where if you want to come back in and do a little bit more modeling in the trees, you can do like a dry brush over, and we're going to go backwards and kind of do something a little different than the rules say. We're going to go light over dark here, which in this case it works pretty good. As a general rule of thumb, when you're painting with watercolor, you want to go light to dark. But in this case, where we want to do some lighter green over the top of our darker green, we're going to take a bit more of a dry mix, and we're just going to kind of stab in some color. Like for instance, like over here, I went a little bit darker than I wanted to go, so if I just do these little dabs of color, I can lighten this area up. And again, my mix is quite a bit more dry here. You could consider this a dry brush application right here. So little spots where I feel like I want some light values to come back in, I can dry brush over the top of this and have a little bit more modeling going on. Get the feeling that we have some smaller leaves there as well by doing these little Just these little kind of stabbing motions to get these smaller looking leaves in there. And you can do this as many times as you want, really, to get to where you want to be. You know, also the good thing about this too is you can go back and forth quite a bit. You can go back and forth with putting light over dark and dark over light until you get to where you want to be. You know, people who are pros with watercolor will knock this out in a heartbeat and have it look amazing, but for people who are starting out, you know, it's nice to know that you can use different techniques and be able to come back in and do things that may be a little bit against the rules, but we still have the same kind of effect, desired effect. All right, so you can see that this is starting to wake up a little bit now, and that's looking nice. Now we could do more in the foreground if we wanted to. I might just do a little bit more to wake it up just a tad. I would probably want to use, like here, I would want to use some foreground color. Just to wake it up. Again, remember, just as shadows are darker in the foreground, colors are more chromatic in the foreground. So our colors are always going to be brighter and more intense in the foreground. So that's something we can take advantage of as well when we're doing things like foreground foliage and stuff. We can punch up our color a little bit and bring more attention and color to the foreground, because that's pretty much what happens in the real world anyway. Here I'm doing a little bit more of a dry brush technique. I'm going to do a little bit more of a wash with my Payne's Gray and my Burnt Umber, just over a couple spots. Get a little bit more modeling in those boulders. Okay, so when you're doing these little bits of detail like this, again, you want to use a drier mix because you don't want this to run away on you. You don't want like dripping, and so you're going to control that by having a drier mix. So right now I'm just using some Payne's Gray, and punching up some of those shadows in the boulders. Taking a little bit of lemon yellow. Or lemon yellow. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to dry brush in a couple little bits of blades of grass to give us a little bit more of a feel that this is actually grass. So I want to kind of keep these blades of grass more in the foreground. So